Hello and welcome to Perspectives Live from Civica with me, your host, Helen Olsen-Bedford from UK Authority. During lockdown, we all turned to this virtual world in order to stay connected to friends, family and to work. Today's technologies have enabled all of this, but the Civica Innovation Lab team's thoughts turned to the future and how emerging trend of, say, immersive technologies could be harnessed to deliver the future of public services. The Civica Innovation Lab, Civica North Star, conducted a series of roundtables and a whole load of research that leads up to today's event, which is asking, what is the potential for the sector and where do these business cases lie for immersive technologies, and how should we best approach emerging technologies like this? So this morning's speakers for our first session today, we have Angela Eager, who is the Research Director for Emerging Technologies at TechMarketView. We've got Tony Colson, who's the IT Director for Sense, and we've got Gavin Smart, who's the Chief Executive for the Chartered Institute of Housing. After our speakers, we're going to move to a panel session where we've got Liz O'Driscoll, who's the Head of Innovation at Civica, Ben Edmonds, who's the IT Programme and Business Change Manager at the London Legacy Development Corporation, Hugh Sullivan, who's CEO at Immersity and SME, and Kevin O'Malley, who's the Innovation and SBRI Lead at Innovate UK. So let's kick off with the view from TechMarketView's Angela Eager. Is immersive technology a good fit for the public sector? Over to you, Angela.
Thanks, Helen, and good morning to everybody. So if you're here today, you know immersive technology is here, and you probably want to find out how it can be applied to deliver some practical benefits. So to start us off today, I'm going to be taking a canter through the immersive technology market before honing it in on whether it can be considered fit for the delivery of public sector services. So on one level, so there's a range of immersive technology, from 3D visualizations on a 2D screen to augmented reality, where the physical is really enhanced by the digital, to mixed reality with its use of digital overlays that allow a degree of kind of live interaction, through to full-on virtual reality digital immersion. But it's not all about the visuals, of course, with haptics, interactions becoming more real through tactile feedback. Now, these images here really don't do justice to this area of technology, and that's the point, really, because to make the most of this thing, you really have to experience the experience. Presenting a business case to somebody who hasn't experienced just how different things can be brings another level of difficulty. And I think immersive technology presents a spectrum of experiences that are capable of addressing use cases ranging from the empathetic to the and this kind of socially inclusive, to the informative, and through to hands-on guidance, as is appropriate. Now, that's particularly important because different functions and different audiences, of course, call for very different approaches. On one level, immersive technology just breaks, breaks a lot of kind of user interface conventions, because it provides us with a new way of interfacing with the digital world, and it, very importantly, that a bridge between the digital and the physical worlds. But on another, it's just another type of user interface. But I think we should consider it as a natural interface, or an invisible experience, if you like, where natural skills such as sort of hand gestures, your eye gestures, and your voice, of course, come into play, often with a tech-driven sort of proactive or automation aspect behind it. Very much driven by data, it enables that data to be viewed, to be interacted with, and to be used in innovative ways. And ultimately, it's all about using providing the right experience in the right format with the right visualization. And that really is a key point, that visualization aspect in the right environment. But it's but the market, the technology is pretty immature, which means the market is very fragmented. In the UK alone, there are well over a kind of 1,000 organisations specialising in things like the creation and the development or production of content, software or hardware, as well as consultancies that focus quite significantly on this area. In addition to that, there's a whole host of other sort of consultancies for whom it's not their specialist function, but they are getting more and more of an appetite for it and doing much more in this area. But the issue with this landscape is just a lack of cohesion and a lack of like complete solutions, and therefore the endless problems of integration, of interoperability and standardization. And that's obviously a big consideration when it comes to delivering public sector services when budgets and resources are restrained. But what's really heartening actually is that when it comes, what's really heartening is the breadth of coverage really in terms of industry sectors that shows there's real appetite, real demand for these types of technologies and services. And it's interesting to see the regional clusters and these hubs of activity that are emerging. And that's a real nexus point for engagement with external experts and with advocates. It's a really good thing to see. So the pandemic has been good for many areas of technology, and immersive is certainly one of them. Necessity really has been the mother of invention, ushering in immersive tech to things like industrial control, to training and education, to remote support and maintenance, as well as like things like communications and collaboration. And in fact, there's a growing list of sort of green light factors. There's pressure for consumers because they want better, different ways to interact. While services suppliers, of course, are under constant pressures to do more and better with less. Now, the hardware needed to access immersive tech is becoming more accessible, but I think device poverty is an issue. And I think poorly conceived immersive services will only widen any digital divide that exists and risks excluding members, areas of the population, particularly the more vulnerable, that arguably could sort of benefit the most from the services, particularly those kind of empathetic and socially oriented services. But there again, there are some really imaginative solutions underway. In the same way that libraries, are starting to lend tools and technology, that there's that sort of scope for them to get together with local authorities, with consortiums of companies to start sort of lending out the necessary immersive technology access to make things a little bit more inclusive. But of course, there are some pretty hefty red light factors too. Data, of course, availability, privacy, ethical considerations. And immersive services are just different and demand different skills, of course. So creating the right content, for example, and keeping it up to date and relevant, big issues there. They need collaboration across creative studios, VR experts, as well as like subject matter experts. I've seen poorly designed immersive experiences risk bringing sort of big adoption programs to a halt. Sharing content development and services is one way forward, but obviously that brings its own sets of challenges. But on the positive side again, there's early talk about marketplaces for immersive tech components that could start tackling some of these issues. Great stuff. I think competing priorities is another difficult area, like the tension between cost reduction agendas and the soft gains that you get from social style services. And of course, immersive technology requires budget, time and resources. So even the most appealing, the most compelling use cases still need robust business case and ROI measurements. And they're hard to come by because the market is so immature. So there's a lot of collaboration needed by all parties to make immersive technology fit for public sector services on this score. So what does make them fit? Well, I think there are four sort of key measures. We need to look at outcomes, we need to look at experiences and audiences, data, of course, and the whole infrastructure behind it. So outcomes. This is an area where fitness for purpose really could be limited more by imagination than the technology itself, I think. One of the challenges is ensuring that projects are outcome or opportunity led rather than technology led. I know it sounds simple, we've said it many times before, but it's still hard to do in practice. And when you've got pressures within the organization, it can be quite difficult sort of maintaining that sort of discipline. I think cost reduction, optimization and productivity outcomes are probably the easiest to work towards in the first instance anyway, because they provide a framework for budget releasing business cases. But too much emphasis risks missing out on some of the higher value and the more impactful outcomes. Now, these sort of involve positive, experiential, empathetic, and socially oriented outcomes that go well beyond cost factors. You know, think about supporting people with mental health and physical conditions and helping them live more independently, or tackling loneliness, for example. But success here can also help reduce costs. So these two need not be mutually exclusive. When it comes to audiences and experiences, well, this is what immersive tech is made for. So obviously it gets high marks on this part of the scorecard. And we have a golden opportunity to reassess service design. And there are some inspiring examples out there and a lot more sort of primed to come forward. Think about guiding individuals through some types of repairs. This is enabling problems to be resolved more quickly and more efficiently. Virtual property viewing has taken off, as has access to remote expertise. And immersive tech is starting to bring digital twins to life for city and for transport planning. And obviously transport and tourism have proven popular for kind of obvious reasons. But health and social care are particularly rich when it comes to use case examples, including providing ways to really connect with those locked away, perhaps through dementia, for example, and to augment mental health services. And in fact, the more you look, the more inspiring examples you find. And without trying to put a damper on things in any way at all, I think the next step is ensuring that we scale and ensure that the immersive services are connected into the broader services portfolio. So I think that these types of examples illustrate that the technology certainly is fit for purpose in terms of the spectrum of immersive experiences. But remember, the services built on them also have to be fit for purpose. And part of this is about aligning the tech and the services to both the audience and the devices that are available. So 2D projection might be the best way to engage, to encourage public engagement in planning consultations. But if you want to help someone dealing with anxiety, or prepare someone to deal with risky or dangerous situations, military, police, etc., that's when VR simulations really come into their own. And if you need to teach or provide guided advice, then mixed and augmented realities definitely have a home. But I think ultimately that the guiding principle is to ensure that the services have a purpose, because tech suitability is directly related to clarity around those purposes. Data, it's always a data problem, isn't there? But data really is the backbone of immersive services, and it's the hardest part of the fit for purpose test to fulfill. And there are high hurdles, there's no getting around that, from the level of data maturity required, including access to appropriate data sets, data types, and understanding the scope of the data that you've got on hand, through to an understanding of the value of combining data sets. And all that means that all that requires really kind of quite heavy duty groundworks. The technical side of data management should in no way be underestimated, but there's also issues such as open data. Sort of what should you share, what should be made open, and how do you need to do you need to consider how it's going to be used. And there are privacy consequences about data set combinations, and there's the wider area of ethics and governance, and these are perhaps even higher hurdles, because the users of immersive services will potentially give away a lot of information about themselves, and this could be personally identifiable data. Very, very tricky area, one that we're still learning about, one where governance is going to be really, really key. And these privacy things, ethics, etc., these are one of the unintended consequences of data set combining. So as well as all the technical work, there's a lot of work and discussion that needs to be done to get this side of things in order. But really, I think that there's a real role to be. We also have to consider how much the public will tolerate, and that's both unknown and potentially quite volatile. I really think IT suppliers need to engage with customers around these data challenges, but I also think there's a role to play in imagining the art of the possible and putting down the pathways to get there, so that public sector organisations in particular don't get bogged down with the data challenges, to the extent that they can't see or don't get to release the value from immersive tech. So there's a way to go before the data aspect of immersive tech is fit for purpose, but it's very much a shared journey of collaboration and education. So on to infrastructure. When it comes to the underlying infrastructure, there's definitely scope for improvement here. The problem is that immersive tech tends to be, it needs to be readily accessible, but it's pretty greedy in terms of the foundations that it needs. And that can put it out of reach for some users and some providers for that matter. And while smartphones are a reasonably accessible entry point, there's a proportion of the population that don't have access to these higher end models. And that will impact on the quality of the experience and how rewarding that experience is going to be. And it's also important to consider what phone-based immersive services can actually deliver compared to people's expectations and how to manage those gaps. Now, 5G is rapidly becoming a requirement, but rollout and availability remains patchy and costly. Probably don't need to say very much more on that subject. Now, handsets and other hardware requirements may be coming down in cost, but I think they're still out of reach of many. And as the failure of 3D TV has shown, people just don't like wearing some types of technologies. Now, suppliers are working on these problems, but until the costs come down and device formats improve, I think that immersive technology is not going to be fit for mainstream public sector service delivery for a little while, but there is still scope for so many sort of pilots and special projects and ways to explore how it can be used. And I think these things need to be happening now rather than later. There's also the connectivity issue. Without standardized connectivity, integration and interoperability, immersive services risk becoming tech islands of diminishing value. So there's definitely work to be done around the infrastructure area to avoid people being disenfranchised. But there's again potential there, ways to go. So overall, is it fit for public sector service delivery? I'd say there's a way to go, but it's definitely getting there. It's very immature, so we have to temper our innate excitement about the art of the possible with the realities of what is deliverable, and consider that accelerated adoption can worsen the digital disruption that's already a feature of many environments, many IT environments. But remember too that it's not just the tech that has to be fit for purpose. Public sector services providers and those that they engage with, there are two parts in this equation, also have to be ready, willing and very able to take these services. But I still think the outlook is promising, and there's a lot of interesting, intriguing and fascinating things to come. So I'll finish there and hand back to Helen.
Angela, thank you. That's brilliant. There's a load of questions coming in. We'll, as usual, we'll pick those up in the Q&A at the end of all our speaker sessions. But in the meantime, I'm just going to put up a quick poll for you to have a quick look at, and please answer if you do. Which of the following immersive technologies do you feel has the most potential for the public sector today? That's virtual, augmented, or mixed realities. And so, Tony Coulson, over to you. Is emerging tech inclusive or exclusive?
Thanks everyone, and really great to hear from you today, and thanks Angela for I think a great opener as well. So I'm here today to talk about emerging technology and its role in terms of kind of inclusivity and exclusivity, and how it can really provide us with some of those opportunities. And it was great to hear Angela's thoughts on the role it has in service delivery. As has already been mentioned, we've seen a real cataclysmic shift in technology over the last year, but it has shone a spotlight not just on digital inequalities, but more generally, especially when we look at education and access to connectivity and things in those areas. So this is something that does affect all of us, not just those people that we might traditionally think of. And so the question then becomes, how inclusive are these technologies? What role do they have, and or are they a kind of an exclusive tool for particular groups of people? So we all know of Tim Berners-Lee, and this is one of his quotes just about the future of the internet. And when I look at technology and think about, you know, the potential it has to overcome how we bring diverse groups together, particularly through collaboration, you know, I think it has huge power, and that has been the real factor again over the last year. But when we look at who our current audience is, I think we do have to question how accessible it is. So, you know, if we just think about who technology is designed for at the moment, they're probably literate, preferably American speaking English. You've got disposable income, you've got easy access to connectivity, and you've probably got no major health issues, disability or learning conditions. You know, could argue that it's kind of designed for the technological equivalent of the middle class. Whilst that in itself is not bad, that, you know, what we do by focusing on that is create an experience for a group of individuals that we are forgetting about. So, you know, technology can be considered inclusive to those who access it, but there are a substantial number of individuals who don't meet those criteria, you know. So I'd just ask everyone to just think about something really simple. You know, imagine if you've got a new piece of tech, you're unboxing it, you know, and if you perhaps have something like dyslexia, you know, how easy is a PDF instruction manual to read? Now, we have seen, particularly in public services, changes around web regulations recently, and it's great to have that focus, but that is the start of a journey, and there's a lot more to do. So in terms of looking at kind of technology being inclusive or exclusive, there are kind of three things I want to touch on. There's, you know, looking at how we encourage the access to technology and what that means, you know, the role it has to play in assisting within our lives, and then particularly focusing on the kind of experience for things from that point of view. So again, if I were to ask most people about sort of disability or accessibility issues sort of 15, 20 years ago, I'm sure that most of us would have given an answer along the lines of wheelchairs, libraries and ramps. You know, if we come forward to today and we look at the discussion around technology, you know, it's quite singularly focused around websites or PDFs, and said that's good, but there's more to it than that. We know the world is very different. We know challenges are multi-dimensional and it's interconnected. And, you know, in the voluntary sector, we talk about impact, and I think what we have to look at is the impact of immersive tech and how it can help people. And for that impact to be effective, you know, it has to be making a difference, and it has to reach those people that need it. So some kind of thoughts really about some of the kind of the barriers that I think that are there at the moment in terms of making that technology accessible. I think there is a question around value. You know, new technology does traditionally have a high price to it. You know, Amanda touched on some of that in her session, and we do have to show value about it. But, you know, when the cost is high and the value is potentially unproven because it's new, that can get in the way of what we need to do. You know, so we do need to perhaps think about, you know, different levels or different ways of kind of having our procurements, different ways of having access to some of those technologies. I think there's also a really big question around your kind of usability. You know, if technology worked in the way it was meant to, many of us, you know, would probably not have the careers that we do. So we know that there's a need for that. But, you know, this is not just about kind of technical know-how. It's not just about a skills issue. It's also a design issue. You know, if we look at you know, some of the augmented reality or virtual reality products that are out there on the market, there's a lot of benefit there for helping people tackle loneliness. There are huge benefits in terms of delivering education, you know, but if the individual is struggling to kind of get the item out the box, is struggling to understand where to turn things on, you know, without the need for extensive support, those are all kind of putting kind of barriers in the way to what we're doing. You know, so, you know, this isn't, say, just technical know-how. I think it's about how we need to look at using a more simplified technology language, how we can use a more kind of inclusive language around products. And then I think the one of the other kind of substantial barriers that we have is, how do we look at getting these products into the hands of those who would benefit from them the most? So this is about the real access issue around putting it in the hands of people who need it. So should we look at those social purchasing models where every one of a certain product purchased, there is a donation or low cost option to a school or a charity. And we see that in non-tech areas. So why can't we look at that for our own worlds? So it's a quick look at really some of what are the key challenges that we face. But I think where we want to spend some time is what is the benefit we can have from technology in how it assists our lives. And really within that, we need to think about how we can make that technology kind of, a lot more accessible. So I'm an ice hockey fan, and the sort of relevance of this is that in ice hockey they recognise the players that make the best overall contribution and not just those who score the most. So I think this is something that we need to think about. It comes from how we all work together, and that's how we should be looking at immersive tech from an accessibility standpoint. It's not about the out and out result of what it does, but it's about how it assists people in living their lives. Now, we might often talk about the kind of what I call the large scale situation. So, what if we could help an individual who is blind or is deaf kind of see or hear? And ultimately, technology is a solution there, and that will be a great day when we can do that. But that's our kind of Formula One type moment. The progression at the very top ultimately takes time to filter down. It does lift the industry, but it has a delay to it. Instead, I think, for immersive tech to really have that value, what we should be looking at is looking at that kind of small scale capability. What can it be doing in terms of tackling the very simple everyday problems that people encounter? So, that's very practical things. How does somebody navigate through an office environment and be aware when someone's moved the dustbin or left the copier drawer open, or any one of those things that we might experience? Or, somebody who might have a sensory impairment, it's about knowing whether there is somebody near them or trying to contact them. And there are great solutions in that space, but it is about getting them to the people that need them. So I wanted to take a few moments to touch on some things in the sort of report that Civica have put together around the role that we have to play in these things. So if we think about data visualization and its accessibility, I think there is a value, but I think it's sort of limited, and it's focused for those of us in service delivery. I think it is about kind of the small scale. So, being able to see how a sensory impaired person navigates through their environment to better design their home or their routine, gives us a lot of capability to design our kind of tailored services. And there are, a lot of those challenges that Amanda has touched on, are particularly around kind of data and governance that are part of that to be considered. I think if we look at where the biggest benefit kind of comes from, this is about the kind of the remote assistance world, and I think this is where I'm the most excited and has a way to really change things for us. Pre-COVID, we all had a very physical way of interacting, and I think in the virtual world we exist in, there are some additional challenges. I think what I would say about this is, it's important that we don't look at digital as being a complete replacement. It is very much a complementary role and should be really enhancing things, not being there as a true alternative all the time. So I think, there's a lot of benefit that can be derived around digital assistance in terms of supporting people with individual needs. I think the work around kind of, some of the additional enhancements we're seeing around the kind of Internet of Things, being able to turn on, the kettle, the oven, manage our home tech is really great. And, people being able to get that kind of things, the haptic feedback, as proximity alerts, all have huge potential. What this should really be about for me is about how we can support people to interact with their networks, with their communities, with their groups around them, and how we can really support them in feeling engaged in everything that's kind of going on. I think we could see over the next 2 to 3 years a real tipping point in meeting some of certainly our social care needs and probably our healthcare needs. And often we interact at a time of crisis. I think immersive tech has that great opportunity to be preventative. It can help individuals stay in their homes longer in a safer and more comfortable world, and that's where our efforts kind of need to be focused. When we think about sort of the role from a sort of supporting ourselves as professionals in that, and we think about the kind of training environment. Again, I think there's a lot of opportunities to be able to simulate environments and simulate experiences for people. I think there's a consideration around scale for that and what we need to do to make this work on a large term basis. I think augmented reality has a great role to play in assessments. And I think, one of the areas that I think we could see some exciting developments would be how we might use this in terms of regulatory standpoints, specifically when it comes to health and safety elements, but that could also extend to, virtual support visits more frequently from people like Ofsted or CQC or anything in that space. So there are lots and lots of ways that we can use tech to assist us in our lives, and and we need to look at them. I think the final point I want to hit on is the role around the experience we give people. So we might traditionally look at the experience for an individual with a sensory impairment, and I'm not actually going to touch on that because I know we're tight for time. But what I want to do is suggest that we can flip that experience, and actually, rather than us trying to give people the experience of our world, we should experience theirs. So we ask in our tech procurements that sense about accessibility features, and often it's turn those on in the operating system or wherever. Now, some of us will probably know those options can be buried, 2 or 3 levels down, and actually, when you've got the visibility of a 10p piece in just one eye and you're blind in the other, it's really hard to find those. So I think for me, the real exciting thing is if we can simulate that experience for the developer, for the product designer, or even for ourselves, we can actually find out how it isn't very simple. And what from that, we can then start to develop much more capable, much more inclusive technology products to use. So I think that is what I want to say from an experience point of view. And in turn, if we've got those products, it will enable us to meet the needs of individuals more comprehensively and become a real power for what we want to do. So I appreciate that's a real whistle-stop tour, and Helen's on to give me the waggle of the finger to say we're done. So I just want to just 2 quick points there. I think this is a quote from Tammy Gray Thompson on screen, and the relevance of this is it's about not always about trying to get to the goal. It's about learning from trying, and that's what I would want to see. We should be aiming to get rid of those barriers, but we will learn by going on that journey, and that journey is about giving people equal opportunity and equal access to the things we want to do.
Tony, thank you. That's real food for thought. Gavin, while you're coming on, I'm just going to share the last poll results. Which of the following immersive technologies are going to be most popular? Definitely a mixed reality. So over half of you, 52% went for a mixed reality on that. And I'm going to share the next poll, quickly put that one up. What's the biggest barrier to adopting these technologies, like immersive technologies? Is it connectivity, affordability, skills, funding? Tell us your thoughts. And Gavin Smart, if I could ask you to come on, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and good morning, everybody. So first of all, just very briefly to introduce myself and the Chartered Institute of Housing. So CIH is the professional body who work for people who work in housing across the UK and beyond, and actually we work across all sectors, but we have our roots particularly in the social housing sector. And I guess today I'm going to give you my thoughts on immersive technology from frankly a non-expert perspective. I don't know a huge amount about digital innovation in general, or augmented reality or immersive reality in particular. But I think you've heard a lot from our previous 2 speakers who are real experts in the area, in those areas. But what I do know a bit about is public services, and especially about housing, and about how the organisations who work in that space tend to think and to operate, the environment, the frameworks that they operate within, and most importantly, the people and communities they exist to serve and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. So I'm going to use that to try to speculate a little bit about where this agenda might go next. And I want to try to use the knowledge that I've got to do a couple of things. So first, a bit of possibly not terribly well-informed speculation about possible areas where these technologies might really make an impact sooner rather than later. And second, some reflections which I hope might be helpful on some possible lessons which I think we might have learned from previous technology, previous digital innovation, which might help to inform how we go about thinking about these technologies and their potential. Because I think the question at the heart here is there a role for immersive technologies in a public services environment like the one that CIH and its members work in? And if so, what is it? For me also, just an observation, say I'm not going to speak for an enormously long period of time, because I think probably the greatest value for all of us will be in the Q&A discussion that comes after what I'm going to say. So with that caveat, off I go. Here's my kind of speculation about the kinds of areas where I think we might see some benefit. So I think I'm informed here by kind of three different perspectives. My colleagues and I've seen some early signs about the ways in which the housing sector is thinking about or is using these technologies. I think you can see examples from other sectors that seem to me to suggest how these technologies can be used in housing. And some of it is just trying to think a bit creatively about the kind of things that Andrew and Tony have set out and what that might mean within a housing context. So some thoughts, and they're really very much in the art of the possible, and they are in the spirit of just giving it a go, because I do agree with the comment in chat, which said to some degree, we just got to give some of this stuff a go and see how we get on. The first observation I'm going to make actually is that certainly in a housing space, a large part of the work that housing organisations do is about, of course, and it should be about the end users, the tenants, the residents, the people, the communities that the housing providers work with, and the outcomes that they're trying to deliver. But of course, the nature of the work that housing organisations do means that a decent chunk of the work that they do is actually connected to the homes, to the physical assets, if you like. And I think that opens up some interesting early ground where we might be able to use immersive technologies, because we could be using them to help our colleagues in housing organisations that perform the maintenance, the repair, the looking after the assets. And I think the degree to which we can use things like augmented reality information on site to help get towards the goal which housing organisations are always trying to achieve, which is right first time rather than right second or third time, so that people have got the information they need to do their job as effectively as possible. I suspect that will be at least as beneficial as any immersive tech that is targeted directly at the end user. A specific example of that, actually, and a very important example, is one of the things that's happening within housing space as a result of the terrible tragedy at the Grenfell Tower is there's a lot of work being done on building safety and fire safety, and thinking about what can be done to avoid a tragedy of that kind ever happening again. And one of the recommendations in the Hackett review that came about as a result of the Grenfell report was that actually these large and complex buildings need to have easily accessible information held on site, so that if there is a major incident, you don't have the situation that happened at the Grenfell Tower, which was firefighters and other first responders thinking, actually, we don't know about this building, its construction, its floor plan. That makes it very hard for us to begin our work, very hard for us to move from floor to floor. Now, in that report, I think the thinking is actually thinking of some kind of fireproof safe where documents are held so that you can get the information you need. But it seems to me there's no reason at all why we couldn't use some of these kind of technologies to fulfill that requirement. So that would be a way of making information rapidly and accurately available to people who need it, either in routine maintenance situations, but also in emergency situations. It seems to me a second area, and I think Tony and Andrew have both touched on this, there's huge potential for remote learning, for virtual training, for user training, whether or not that be customers or whether or not that be colleagues, for orientation. We can do a lot of the things that we used to do physically. I think we can do online. We can use immersive tech to help with that. And I think we can do it more accurately. Another area, I think, consultation and discussion and giving people a glimpse of what things will look like in practice. For years, planners have occasionally used exercises called Planning for Real, where in trying to engage communities with proposals for changes in their areas, there have been kind of mock-ups and discussions about what those changes might look like in practice. That seems to me to be an area that sort of work is an area that seems to me to be ripe for immersive technology. And I know it's already beginning to be used in those spaces. So I think the vast majority of what I talked about there is actually how we can make interventions that work with our colleagues rather than with our customers with tenants, residents, communities. A final point, though, it's clear from health and social care that there's already a degree of work happening in this area, looking at how immersive technologies can help assist vulnerable people. And I think we can learn from and maybe catch up with some of that in housing. A couple of examples, there's been some research done by Microsoft and some research partners, looking at how using VR alongside a treadmill setup can help older people or people with impaired mobility avoid falls by kind of retraining their ability to navigate space, to work their way around objects, to be literally more sure-footed. The result of that work showed a 40% reduction in falls in the people who've gone through that program. Given that the degree to which falls often are the event that means that people end up in hospital needing care, that kind of technology and that kind of intervention seems to me to be a really important area to look at. And then there is also very interesting work that's taken place using immersive real life experiences as a form of kind of memory therapy for people suffering from dementia, which reports fantastic results including increased brain activity, better mood, improved social ties from the shared experiences of doing that, actually some pain reduction, some reduced aggression, and some regained memories, simply by allowing people to experience virtually things that they would originally have done in the real world and now are not able to do. So it seems to me that there's some relatively low-hanging fruit there that we could think about in terms of areas for looking at the use of this technology. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk to you about. The second thing was to talk about what seemed to me to be some lessons from history from other work we've done where we have tried to adopt new technology or new innovation. Some has gone well, some has gone less well. So my thoughts about kind of possible lessons learned. The first of which, without a doubt, is the point that Angela made about standardization and interoperability. In earlier technological innovation, we have without a doubt seen a reluctance to adopt technology that doesn't offer proper interoperability, that doesn't offer decent levels of standardization. And in fact, as a result of that, often a reversion to analog ways of doing things. Stuff needs to talk to other stuff, and it needs to be easy to use. If we can't achieve that hurdle, we probably will get lower levels of adoption. In the same spirit, I think accessibility and simplicity are everything. In all of the examples I tried to give in terms of my speculation, I was talking essentially about either non-specialist colleague users or non-specialist client users. This is not their core business. We have to make it easy and simple for people to use. Tony was talking about the degree to which options are buried way down in choice menus. The physical tech itself as well simply needs to be easy to use. Otherwise, people will not adopt it and will not use it. I think we need to proceed kind of optimistically. We need to give it a go, but we also need to proceed cautiously in the sense that it seems to me that one of the other lessons of history is we have failed to maximize the use of one technology before moving on to the next. And therefore that we then end up with lots of half implemented solutions. That doesn't help anybody and it leads to frustration. A kind of analytical point, I think we also need to make sure that we are properly understanding the problem and that it exists in the way that we thought it existed. So I was involved in the early 2000s in a lot of work on digital exclusion, and certainly that work began with really complicated questions about how on earth do we hardwire the internet into tab locks? Do we need to buy computers for all of our tenants and residents? Can we make them available in libraries? They're completely wiped away actually by smartphone access, and actually by an understanding that many tenants and residents already had limited but available data via their mobile devices whilst we were still pushing hardwired solutions. So it's just about checking that the problem is the one that we thought it was. And for me, I think the final observation in this part of my remarks would be, it seems to me that with the in a spirit of pragmatism, probably the answer is to do it for ourselves first or with our customers first rather than do it to customers first. Now that's quite a housing observation, and that may not apply to all public service areas, but I think these technologies are so ripe for improving the way that we do our jobs that we can start there and then move on to technologies that improve the experience for customers and users with a bit of understanding of what it feels like to be a user ourselves. because I think that also recognises that, at least in the short term, costs for residents or for users might be problematic if they don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have 5G data. So allowing that market to mature while we take advantage of some other low-hanging fruit seems to me to be a sensible thing that we might look at doing. Just very finally then, a quick thought also on the operating realities for housing organisations, and perhaps these are applicable to other wider public service sector organisations too, but I think they might help us think about how we might best set about doing this work. So first and most importantly, these services are about people, they're about their lives, they're targeted to delivering some pretty essential outcomes, like for instance, a safe, secure, affordable place to live. So the price of failing to deliver here is high, with significant reputational and political risk attending to that. So we just need to be conscious of that, because I think that affects the appetite and maybe the places where we might want to start to use this technology first. Second, the revenue streams that will pay for this activity are quite often drawn from the income of either relatively poor households or indirectly via things like housing benefit from the state. So that, combined with the essential nature of the services that we're talking about here, that produces an outlook which does really value the careful custodianship of those resources. You'll hear housing organisations talk about tenants' rents, and you know, throwing large amounts of money at speculative projects is difficult in that kind of environment. So it does breed a degree of caution, and I think we need to be aware of that. And that caution, alongside the fact that we're talking about a relatively highly regulated sector, quite rightly, given some of the services that are being provided, there's also really quite a strong emphasis on understanding risk and controlling it. Nonetheless, I agree with the spirit of giving it a go. You have to start somewhere, and if we don't begin to try to use this stuff, we never will. So those points are long away from the subject matter I started with, and they aren't about how these new technologies might impact on the work of housing and housing professionals, but they perhaps do tell us something about the environment that they work in, and maybe offer some insight into how to think about not only the what in terms of the potential here, but also the how in terms of how we might go about deploying that potential. With that, that's the end of what I wanted to say, because I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. So I will hand back to Helen.
Thank you, Gavin. That was brilliant. Let's share the last poll results then. Okay, what's the biggest barrier to adopting? Well, it looks like affordability, which I guess is no surprise, as in post-pandemic, our budgets are looking terribly, terribly tight here in the public sector. So affordability looks like the main one. And as I put up poll 3, could I please ask all my speakers now to turn the cameras on and come back on screen for the Q&A. Question in the poll is, where do you think immersive technologies could provide the biggest impact? Data visualization, remote assistance, enhanced experiences, or is it in a training and assessment areas? So thank you all for joining me back on screen. Lots of questions coming in. So let's start with the one here, is like, how do we keep pace? How do we integrate this ever-changing technology world? You know, how do we keep pace? And Tony, you know, how do we bring things like immersive technology into play?
I think it's really hard, and I think, you know, as Angela touched on, we have seen that kind of you know, necessity over the last year of doing those things. I think in terms of keeping pace, that I don't think as a tech profession we can keep pace with everything. I think that is the thing. What we need to be really looking at is, I think, how we build the skills and knowledge across our workforces to be more comfortable with the use of some of this technology. And I think that way, you know, there's lots of things, and I'm sure the other panelists will agree, you know, you get the question, oh, we need this, how are we going to support it, what are we going to do with it, what needs to be done in the background? And, you know, somebody said to me the other week, I just assume you know the answer to this stuff. And I say, well, no, we don't. The only difference we might have as tech professionals is we can probably work the answer out a little bit quicker. And I think if we could elevate our broader workforce skills in terms of some of that confidence, they then might be more willing to kind of give it a go, and maybe be a little less reliant on some of the things we need to focus on. And we can then look at, you know, the security, the governance stuff, not the use side of things. So yeah, that's my thought.
Angela, what about your thoughts on that? How does this, is it a layer on top, immersive technology, or is it something that can be integrated with existing service solutions, etc.?
I think initially, because it's such a different area, we need the new skills, obviously. It's going to be a kind of it's going to be kind of an aside, but the key is you've got to sort of do the pilots, you've got to find out what's going to be useful, but you also have to have a roadmap in mind as to how you sort of integrate them with the rest of your portfolio. I think the issue of keeping up to date, I think there's a lot to be said for doing these things internally, so solving internal problems first, because then you find out where the problems are, where things are going to fall down, and you make the mistakes internally rather than exposing yourself to your citizens who have expectations. And if you don't meet those expectations well initially, you're going to cause a lot of problems further down the line.
Yeah, Gavin, because you mentioned that, didn't you? You were talking about that.
And just very eloquently made the point that I tried to make, which you've done it better than me, which is I think you experiment on yourselves first before you experiment on your citizens and your customers. Seems to me to be a good place to start, because you'll learn a bit about the experiences that they will have as well when they try to use the technology. The second thing to say, which I don't mean to be gloomy, because I think I am definitely in the camp of give it a go. I think it's also important to recognise that quite a lot of us in public services organisations are probably not, we're not well placed to be early adopters. So actually, one of the things that if you were ever to be bored enough to read Sir Hatch's IT strategy, one of the things it says is, our risk appetite is that we are not big enough to be an early adopter. We don't want to be miles behind, but we want to be just that little bit not on the edge of the wave, because when we're not well set up, we're not big enough, we don't have the capacity. To some degree, we've got to be sure, we've got to have a reasonable belief that this stuff is going to work for us. And I think that also links with the point that I made about maximising the use of the stuff you're using at the moment before you move on to the next thing. Because I think nothing frustrates, well, we know it frustrates our users internally, but nothing frustrates customers quite like the fact that just the point they've got to grips with the last thing you were using, you've moved on again. They do appreciate change and innovation, but only if it works for them. If you're constantly, I'm going to be naughty now, I won't name them. Our corporate banking provider, our UK retail bank, has deployed a series of appalling platforms where the only thing they have in common is they shift from one to the next before we've got time to got used to using the last appalling platform. It hasn't worked for us. I imagine that they believe the tech is improving. I can't see it. All I can see is a constantly shifting, irritating background.
Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back a little on the notion about kind of testing on our citizens from that point of view, and I think there's a level at which that's true, but I think there's also a level at which a lot of these inclusive techs are going to be used in a consumer space before they're maybe used in a corporate space, and actually there's a way to perhaps get that engagement. Yes, for certain parts of our citizens that's true, but for others it's not, and I think there's perhaps a bit more of a blend there that we could consider.
Yeah.
So I just agree, Tony. What I would suggest is, there is a long and quite noble history actually of a kind of what's the word? Sort of participant researchers. People who are willing to give it a bash. And I think the way you do it is don't force it on everybody. Find some people who want to help you test stuff. Work with them first, and then work with the rest of your clients once you're sure you've got it in a place that it's going to work well.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. Angela Eager, Tony Coulson and Gavin Smart, thank you for joining me and for sharing your thoughts on fantastic presentations. I'm going to ask my panel speakers to come on screen now. And while we do that, let's have a quick look at the last polls. Where could immersive technologies provide the biggest impact? Remote assistance. That's an interesting one. And you can see actually with our virtual world now in the pandemic, that makes perfect sense too, I guess. So I'm going to put up the next question for the polls, which is, how long do you think this is? When is this going to be a reality that we can use it in the public sector? Are we talking under 1 year, 1 to 2, or 3 years out? So Liz O'Driscoll from Civica, Ben Edmonds from the London Legacy Development Corporation, Hugh Sullivan from Immersity, and Kevin O'Malley from Innovate UK. Thank you all for joining me. Let's pick up on some things that have come out quite strongly, which is around affordability, and we do need a robust business case. Lots of questions in the Q&A for that. So a robust business case is key as budgets tighten. Kevin, would you like to pick up on that one first for us, please?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think one of the key things I want to say is that there is never a business case for adopting a technology. There's a business case for adopting a tool to solve a particular challenge. And I think this is something which often muddies the water around innovation. in that these technologies are quite compelling for people like me. You know, I love this sort of technology and I would want to use it, but there needs to be a defined use case. It has to be a tool that's being used to solve a challenge. And that's where that's where the business case comes from. And unfortunately, the relationship at the moment between public sector and business isn't sufficiently cooperative to be able to really build that business case well.
That's an interesting one. Liz, what do you think to that?
Yeah, I have to say I absolutely agree with Kevin, and I think, you know, it is all about finding that problem, you know, that you want to solve. And I think, you know, often then the business case will come from that, because you've defined what the challenge is, you know, what the problem you need to solve. And you know, we are seeing people starting to explore and use these, and I would say mainly driven by necessity. I think, you know, the pandemic has created a lot of problems that technologies like this have been available to solve. And sometimes I think without people even really associating that they are augmented or virtual reality technologies. So, you know, we are seeing a problem where, how do I deliver my service to my tenants? How do I enable them to be supported to deliver some self-service or some self-repair? You know, actually there was a question in the chat about using in education, and we are seeing people using it in education to allow students to immerse themselves using largely the Google Cardboard and the smartphone in chemistry environments, or exploring under the sea. So, you know, we are seeing those problems, and Kevin's right, it has to start from, I can't do, what can I use? And then the business case generally follows, I think, from there.
Yeah. Ben, over at the London Legacy Development Corporation, you've been using it a bit as a test bed. You've had the luxury there of being able to use it. So where do you see those emerging business cases and use cases coming out?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Yeah, so over in the Olympic Park, we are currently exploring what a business case might look like for developing a complete digital twin of the park. And as you say, we do have a slight advantage in that we're kind of seen within London as a bit of an urban test bed for this type of innovation. But the reality is, particularly under current climate, is we still need to find a robust business case. And I think where we're sort of reassured to some extent with the business case is some of the case studies that we've already been able to deploy, and some of the kind of pockets of success. I think sort of the adoption, the demand out in the public and with partners already, around sort of digital services in general, but in particular immersive technologies as well. A few examples come to mind is that through necessity, we had to run some public development consultations online because of the lockdown, and the feedback and the adoption and the successes we got through that kind of encourage us that expanding on the digital experience in the public realm could be a really good thing for us.
Mm. Kevin, coming back to the kind of like that innovation side, does that mirror?
With this technology, as I mentioned before, I find it very compelling for people like me who are technology early adopters, who are interested in this sort of bleeding edge tech. But at the moment, I think there's a huge gap between the solutions that are being created and the challenges that exist. And I think that needs to be brought closer together. And SBRI, as you mentioned, Small Business Research Initiative, which is a pre-commercial procurement tool, is the opportunity to do that. It's where, rather than defining a solution, the public sector organization defines a challenge and says, this is something that we have a problem with and we can't fix. And then the experts in the technology come forward with the solutions. And therefore there's sort of a co-production collaboration relationship that's formed, rather than the sort of the current relationship between business and public sector, which isn't necessarily always that supportive or productive.
So Hugh, you're on the front line of this. You are a startup, an SME, and you are looking at some of these innovations, and I'm assuming you're working with a lot of innovation funding as well. Where do you see this?
So it's interesting, right? Learning a lot from the conversations. I guess in Immerse, we've come at it from a little different. Well, I don't have a technical background. I come from industry around creating psychological safety and risk environment and reducing risk environments. So what we're doing is creating digital twins rapidly into a cloud-based enterprise platform. So it allows, instead of having to build standalone AR, VR, MR applications, there is a level of kind of self-serve for people we're working with, so partnerships we're working with. So you can put up, as for example, we're working with police force around crime scenes, taking a 3D capture of a real scene, transporting it into the immersive environment, which is in the cloud. It takes maybe a week to do that. Very much more affordable than building a standalone VR package. And then that's accessible from multiple devices. So you were talking about the different types of devices. You can use a Google Cardboard on a smartphone right up to a full, heavily immersive VR tethered system. But all of those are accessing the same database. So you can, depending on, it's really about democratizing VR, XR, extended realities, so that whatever device you're coming in from, you'll be able to see the same type of data and experience that together. And then as technology advances and obviously hardware is going to change, you're not stuck with one fixed solution. So that's that's the kind of partnerships we're really getting into now with dementia therapy, virtual health village, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm just going to put up the next poll while we have a break there. How long do you feel it will take for immersive technologies? That was the question that we put up, and the answer is, well, 7% of you are ready to go in under 1 year. That's quite impressive for an emerging technology like this. So 51%, just over half of you think there's still more to do. There's a significant majority of you are going to be monitoring it for the next 1 to 2 years. So that's actually pretty quick uptake. I think the pace of change has changed forever here now. Anyway, let's move on. So what can we do today? So I'm gonna, let's take an example as a challenge. One of the wicked issues in the public sector, social care. So if I was going to give you that challenge, what could immersive technologies do today to help in social care? Liz, let's come to you.
I mean, how can we apply? It is already being applied, and albeit, these are pilots. So, through our exploration, we found quite a lot of examples of people that are starting to think about using these to enhance the experiences of people, both in terms of reducing isolation or dementia therapy. So some beautiful examples of bringing, usually using the big tethered systems, granted, but using that to immerse people to maybe go for a walk or an experience in a childhood street or in a woods where they grew up, and actually that's got tremendous social value and benefit. We're also seeing it in terms of assessment. So there's some nice examples in Oxford, I think, of starting to use these technologies for assessment, for rehabilitation. So before you go home, do we assess you using these virtual reality systems with haptic feedback, so using the gloves, to really start to understand what people can do and then put into place the appropriate package of care. So it is starting to be used. Business cases are challenging because they become cross-sector at that point. So you've got local authority and healthcare. And I think there's one thing that we're not that good at doing, is investing in one sector and seeing the benefits and the value realized somewhere else, and making that case, I think, can be a real challenge. But those are the areas that are really, really big, and will come first.
Hugh, you've got some ideas and that you've got some pieces working around there. I mean, I was interested in the in that dementia care. Where is where's that business case within dementia care? I can understand how wonderful it would be to help people on that front. Does that reduce any of the costs of care?
Yes, so I guess to Kevin's point, we're looking for use cases that are going to make a difference, right? Because the tech can be very sexy, but does it actually do something different? So exactly, we're looking for really good partnerships for dementia therapy is a great example. The research is showing that it reduces people's stress with dementia, reduces their stress levels by going into an immersive environment for 20 minutes, roughly a day, again on a mobile device or on one of these standalone VR systems. It reduces that stress level, means they sleep better, and then the amount of care they need and the amount of 24-hour oversight they need reduces quite significantly. So then the cost of care also reduces. So compare that to the cost of putting in a package and developing those packages with multiple environments. It's the business case is absolutely there, and it shows what a difference that can make with relatively simple technology.
Yeah. Are you seeing any business cases, Ben, over on the trials and the test beds that you're running Are there any solid ones coming out, especially around the thinking about the social care sector? Have you got any that come up there?
Yeah, one that we're particularly interested in is around mobility. So if we develop a new part of the park or our district, being able to safely, relatively low cost, anybody that may have mobility challenges, giving them an immersive experience of what a place might be like, where there might be obstacles, challenges to mobility. And you can do that in a safe, relatively low cost way. That was a really good example. Another one that comes to mind is around placemaking consultation. Getting anybody to come in and have an immersive feel of what a future space might look like, what it might feel like, and allowing them to input into that and give their opinions. There's only so much you can take from a 2D drawing or a conversation. If you're immersed in that future space, you can give some really informed opinions. So that's another thing that's worked quite well for us. Kevin,
have you seen anything coming out of the SBRI on that front?
Yeah, we've supported an awful lot of different sorts of projects through SBRI and other funding at Innovate UK. I think some of the interest, we're talking about a very broad range of technologies here, aren't we? A massive spectrum, really, from this sort of tethered VR kit to the handheld devices that could be used in remote working. I really like the remote working stuff. I think the opportunity to go to a site and to be able to engage with a job without having to bring endless manuals or to have already gone through a specific training on a particular boiler setup. That to me is quite an obvious application. But as I say, we're talking about such a vast range of different technologies and a huge spectrum of different areas in which it could be applied. I think we have to start to really crystallize those challenges and apply the right technologies to them in that collaborative way of working, where business inform the local authority about the capabilities of the technology and the local authority inform business about the granularity of the challenge.
It is always a tough one to get innovation budget and get out of the, it's almost one thing you can get a pilot off the ground. To get to sustainability is another thing entirely. Any thoughts on how that can be enabled? Kevin, we'll stick with you, and then we'll come to Liz after that.
Okay, I'll be quick.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think it is very much about establishing that business case, and business case, we're always coming back to that because that's really what drives scale in this domain. But in order to develop the business case, you have to do some sort of piloting. In order to do the piloting, I would say that you really need to understand your problem domain and the capability of the technology. So again, I'm coming back to this idea that the nature of the relationship between the public and the private sector needs to change fundamentally in this area to make it really successful. Got to be much more collaborative, got to be much more trusting, got to be much more of a shared development.
Liz, any thoughts on that in terms of, where does a company like Civica, with the innovation, the lab itself, where does it see itself in that, bringing pilots through to sustainable businesses?
So I think, it is a complicated area. And as you rightly pointed out and Kevin has said, there are a lot of people will think, I'll get an innovation budget and I'll go and run a pilot. But it is all about that long term, I call it that transition planning of where the technology will go. So what I'd like to see, through our own organisation, through Civica and other bigger organisations, and is to really start to think about what those problems are. What are the problems that our customers are facing? What are the challenges that public services are facing that we can help bring ideas forward for? And it's really that move to that sort of challenge-based procurement. So, let's not pre-decide that what we need is a widget that looks like this, that has to fit like that and tether over here. What we need to do is say, we have got a problem. Our citizens aren't sufficiently empowered to challenge and get involved in the local plan, or our tenants are struggling to be able to self-serve and learn new skills, or we're struggling to be efficient in our resource management and send people out, so we want to prioritize those that need face-to-face care. What technologies can the market bring forward to support me to do that? And I genuinely believe if we shift to that model, a lot of these problems start to go away.
There's the cost of the technology as well, isn't there? And reducing cost. Technology tends to get cheaper as we go on, it evolves. Hugh, how do you find, you talked a minute ago about an enterprise approach. Does that mean that once, say, a local authority or a health authority has put in some kind of infrastructure, can that just be reused? Can they be self-sufficient in building their own solutions and adding them into their services?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're one of the early VR companies that's actually doing this on an enterprise platform, right? So that once you've got the platform set up, you can deploy any immersive experience you want into a single app application, again, whether that's on a phone or in a tethered or standalone VR device. So if you've got that skill internally to be able to build up those environments, or you can get help, it reduces the cost significantly rather than having to build an individual VR standard or AR standalone solution every time, which can cost up to 200,000, which obviously it makes it kind of out of scope in terms of affordability. So yeah, a cloud-based solution which you can manage, self-manage, is I think the way forward.
And do we have the skills internally, Ben? Do we have the skills? Do we have that? I mean, the costs, etc.
Yeah, well, if we don't have the skills internally, then there's so many different partnerships we can build. We've got some really positive experiences where we are with partnering with universities, startups. So the enthusiasm and the expertise is out there. It's just building those partnerships. Mm-hmm. The other thing that came to mind as well, Helen, when we're all talking about trying to build these business cases, is another thing that kind of we're looking into the early stages of investigating is around commercial opportunities with digital space. And that could be sort of getting money back on digital space for online events, could be marketing, advertising. And we're thinking, and it's already happening in the retail space, marketing, I beg your pardon, media, sports and entertainment. So we're thinking, why can't the public sector have a look at that as well? So yeah, there are other streams, and I think that is going to, the return on investment opportunities around digital advertising, marketing, that's only going to continue to grow, I think.
So you think it could provide an income stream as well, maybe sort of tourism and things, virtual tours and stuff?
Potentially, absolutely. If you're an area, if you're an area that's developed their own digital twin with a whole range of different useful data sets, and you've delivered on a range of use cases, then it could save somebody a lot of time, a lot of money to feed into your digital twin rather than developing their own. So there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, so with the London Development, the London Legacy Development Corporation, LLDC is easier, isn't it?
That's it, yeah.
Have they've created obviously a digital twin. Are you working with trying to offer these as platforms to other people?
Well, we're kind of still looking into the business case of the holistic digital twin, but we have adopted existing platform. I think it's okay to say it's ViewCity. And yeah, but initially from a planning perspective, so developing our planning applications and help us with our planning strategies and decisions. But we're building up a list of use cases now that we know that virtual 3D models and immersive virtual augmented reality could really feed into and can support. And yeah, I mean, wherever it comes into sort of these human interactions, these human engagement, we're kind of trying to keep level-headed to some extent, where we know that this immersive technology is likely to complement those real-world interactions rather than replace, and we're trying to find some synergy there.
Kevin, what do you think of that, listening to that? Is there an income stream that could be built into this innovation, so it could be generating income as well as cutting costs?
I think that's possible. Local authorities aren't really set up to be commercial organisations, or that public sector organisations aren't necessarily as focused around this area. One of the things I do see as a major challenge here, though, is how public sector organisations are set up with their funding. Hugh was saying earlier about being able to provide an enterprise platform, a layer, which would enable different services to be able to access different immersive assets or tools. Now, the issue is who pays for that platform, because there generally isn't a cross-cutting budget, which is an infrastructure budget within a local authority. It tends to be sector-specific or siloed, which makes these big investments quite hard to bring forward. So I think this is one of the inhibitors or barriers to us really sort of progressing this rapidly, because who pays for it, who owns it, who pays the service charges on it? Because the benefits of some of this stuff, is it the IT department who pay for this? Because benefits probably land in education or in adult social care or something like that. So it's the way that authorities are set up that is really going to be difficult for us to rapidly move this forward.
That's the perennial issue, isn't it? Yes, sorry, Ben. And then I was going to come to ask Liz actually about that from your perspective, whether you see that funding issue and the benefits being accrued in different places. Ben.
Yeah, just Kevin raises a really good point. And I guess the other way we're looking at it, where there might not be opportunities for direct return of investment, there could be opportunities, and we're seeing it ourselves in the Olympic Park, in that the private sector are really keen to try and trial some of this immersive technology. But one, they don't have necessarily a public space to be able to demonstrate this stuff and trial it. And also they don't necessarily have real world useful use cases and problems to solve. So they come with the majority of the funding, and we might provide the public space and the challenges to overcome. Yes, that's a really important point too.
It's a really kind of, chicken and egg type issue, isn't it? I mean, Liz, do you see that the local services sector, are they digitally mature enough to be able to have those skills internally, to be able, well, actually, do they have the bandwidth these days? Everyone's running to stand still with the pandemic, etc. Liz?
Do you know, again, it is a really difficult conversation. We had a really interesting roundtable on it, and a lot of these issues were raised there. And I think, it all comes down to making that value case again. What is the problem that you're trying to solve, and where's the value? And I think different organizations and areas are at different levels of maturity. And certainly that whole piece around sharing data cross sector, which is what you really need to get a view, is not very mature. We are seeing some examples coming together, and I've seen it come together, particularly driven by the carbon neutral agenda now and that whole placemaking agenda. So, let's bring whole cities together and recognize that they exist, whole urban areas, they exist because of a collaboration of different organizations to make this place great for the people that are there. And there I am starting to see people come together to share data. And in Oxford, we've already got examples of healthcare talking with local authorities to share those benefits and investment cases, because ultimately it's about making that a better place to be. So, I hope that will drive, and I think the pandemic's opened a lot of eyes to the fact that we've got gaps in our data and we couldn't identify the most vulnerable people. And hopefully, but those of you listening that have been there, you'll know for 10-15 years, we've been trying to find ways forward around digital transformation. So it's got to be about those problems that we know we need to solve that are getting more and more tricky.
It is around placemaking and budgets around place where the benefits might accrue in a different place. That's absolutely something that the sector, government and everybody's been struggling with for at least a decade or two, I'd say. 2 decades. Yeah. Hugh, you had to comment there.
Quickly, so I think we need to be creative in the way we collaborate and partner, right? So there's win-win. So, for example, we've started work with the University of South Wales on digitally transforming their curriculum, right? And as Liz is saying, we haven't told them what use cases they've come up with: policing, crime scene investigation, and aeronautics, air marshalling as the most high impact for them and their students, but also the most commercially potential in them. So we've entered an agreement where the students will get access to all that free of charge, and we'll share the commercial income that comes from selling that outside of the university. So, and it is, to Kevin's point, I am talking with the IT department, with each of the engineering department, the crime policing departments, and they are starting to work. And what I've noticed, universities tend to be pretty slow. They're not. We've been very fast. We're not 3 weeks into it. We already have a digital twin of a crime scene, because there's a pull, right, from both sides. Obviously, as the commercial organization, we want to get this to market to realize the revenue. From the university side, they want to be able to offer it to students and obviously to get an income stream of their own. So I think being creative in that collaboration and partnership can help drive things forward and find those use cases that are really clear.
Thank you, Hugh. I think the pandemic has also speeded up the whole pace of change and the appetite for finding new solutions. Let's hope that this wave of progress and adoption of new technologies continues. Before we carry on, I'm just going to put up another poll. Which sector do you feel is best equipped today to take advantage of these technologies? Health and care, local gov, education, etc. Let us have your thoughts. We're getting quite close on time now, so in fact, we're very close to the end. But before we do disappear, what I want to ask you is, I want your final words of advice for anyone who's considering these technologies today. Words of advice. Ben, I'm going to come to you.
Public engagement comes to mind, consultation, yeah, immersive experience on place building, and yeah, I would say key thing for me is never underestimate the interest, understanding, and input that you can get from the public, and make sure that they are included the whole way. So be transparent, get them involved, and I think, yeah, immersive technologies to go and reach out to people that can't physically be with you and get their opinions and their sentiment, really important.
Kevin.
I agree with Ben. I think the opportunity here is to give people a really immersive, rich experience of the possibilities of the future, and to bring them with you as you create that future as a public sector organisation. So yeah, I think that's where the power really lies.
Okay, Hugh.
I think it needs to be inclusive and make a difference and be impactful, and to try, like I said, just try out a few small demos so people can see what this brings. You know, once you see it and you're in it, it's like, okay, we need more of this, and people see the benefit of it. So yeah.
Liz, and final thoughts from you. And also, I just wanted to chuck in there, what about the business case? Because at the moment, everyone, you know, there's lots of great advice there, but the reality is, unfortunately, in the public sector, we're going to need a business case in the next few years to make anything happen. So Liz, any thoughts?
Yes, I think, you know, it's to, you know, remember, I know we're really constrained by, you know, efficiencies and budgets, but actually we've been really constrained over the last 6 months with the pandemic, and more pressures on services than ever. And the amount of movement forward and things that people have done is incredible. So don't forget that. But I think something I took really strongly from our engagements with our roundtables is that, you know, this technology is more than about how can we make our current services better. You know, actually, does this not enable a potential future set of new services? So, you know, maybe it's that thinking forward piece, that exploring and saying, well, actually, what problems could I now solve using this new technology? And that's what I'd love to see happen.
Brilliant. Ben, last thoughts. We've literally got 30 seconds. Go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say again that I think really important are partnerships. So lots of different people around the country are having these same conversations. So consolidate, collaborate.
So sharing, let's all talk about it a bit more. Thanks, Ben. So let's look at those last poll results quickly. Which sector is most likely to be able to take advantage of this right now? And it's coming out quite clear. There's, you know, 39% for health and care and 41% for education. And yeah, there's obviously some big wins there. You can see there's some probably quite big business cases in there, certainly around education and social care. If you create a virtual care home and train all your care workers virtually, gosh, you could cut costs enormously. Firefighters, emergency services, etc. There's obviously huge things that can be done there. And the example that we heard earlier about dementia and the use of virtual reality to improve dementia care and also improve the lives of their residents as well. So Liz O'Driscoll, Ben Edmonds, Hugh Sullivan, Kevin O'Malley, thank you for joining me. And of course, thank you everybody out there. Thank you all of you for joining us today. We really hope that you've enjoyed this Perspectives Live, and we hope that you'll join us for a future session of Perspectives Live with Civica. Thank you very much. Goodbye.